Okay, today we're going to learn how to flare a brake line. Brake lines are pretty critical. They have to be double flared. If they're not, they can easily leak. First thing I'm going to show you is how to cut a piece of tubing. On your tubing cutter, there's a little groove right here. And that groove is so that if you're going to cut a flare off, you've got a flare there, you put the flare part in that groove. That way you can cut real close to the end of it. That way you can cut real close to the end of it and get that last little bit off of there. Okay, let's start here. If you can see the end of this, I just cut it off. And when you cut it, the cutter pushes metal into the center. When you start off, you really don't want that stuff in there because it's just a ridge around there. You kind of want to get rid of that. So normally what I do is I've got one of these little swingies right here. It's a deburr tool. This one here is a Cobalt. You can get them. You can get these things at Harbor Freights. Stick it in there and wind that thing around in there and get rid of at least most of that ridge that's there. And now, I don't know if you can tell the difference, but the hole is about all the way clear. Okay, the next thing you need to remember is you need to stick your nut on before you flare. Otherwise, you're probably not going to get it on. So you stick the nut on. This here is a 1/4 inch tubing here. And we're going to use the 1/4 inch hole in this swingy here that holds it. And this particular one, it holds really good because this is probably, I don't know, 75 years old. I got it from my grandfather, and I'm into my 60s, and he had it for many years. Now, to double flare, you're going to have to use one of these swingies. When you just buy a flare kit, it's going to come with this. It's going to come with this. And a lot of times, you're not going to get these. Now, this thing here is actually the die that lets you make your first flare. You can't see this, but it's concaved in there. And so basically what it does is when you flare, so your tubing is here, and what it's doing is it's taking the tubing and it's rolling it this way. Oops, sorry. It's rolling the tubing this way. So it takes all your tubing and kind of rolls it in there that way with the hole in the center still. And that's the first step of the flare. That's one flare. Now, how far do you stick this tubing up in here? That's a key point. If you don't stick this up in, have it sticking through the correct amount, you won't get a good flare. And what I do is, if you look at this, the thickness of this part right here, let's see. Okay. If you can see it, right there is a step in there. You want to put this down on your die, down on this part, and you want that to stick through to just the top of this right here. That's the perfect amount. So I set that on there. Kind of loosen this up, get this to go through, and I get it right to the top, right even with that part, and bam, we're at the right depth. Okay, so you want to tighten this up. I always tighten the inside one first. I clamp it till it closes, and then I come to the outside one and I clamp it until it pretty much closes. Okay. Now you take this part and you stick it in the hole. Take your actual flare tool and you want to try to make sure this is straight up and down and even and stuff. That it matters. It'll still work if you're a little bit off. And what I'm going to do is, you can't really see this gap here, but there's a gap here between this little tool and the thing, and it's probably, well, it's the width of this top part. It's a pretty big gap. It looks like it's a lot way to squeeze down, but it works. Now, a lot of times you'll have a hard time getting this. Okay, so I squeeze that all the way down to the bottom, and then I take this off. Now you're gonna have a little hard time getting that out because it's squeezed down on that little pin sticking in there. Don't break this off. You've only got one. I always, when it comes to 3/16, I have extra ones because they break. These larger ones like this 1/4 inch style, they don't usually break. Okay, now I want to show you what I was talking about. If you look at this, it just took this and smashed that tube all in around that little pin. I don't know how good you can see that. Okay, so now we can put the flare in. We have that. This is almost a bubble flare. They call it a bubble flare. That probably would be the same thing. I don't know. I don't do them. That's a whole nother game. So you take now you have this set right. It's at the right depth. You don't loosen anything. Then you put this tool on there and just smash her down. Now, the thing about it is, on a double flare, it actually, when you tighten the fitting, you're actually crimping down because it folded that over, and now we're going to push it down in and flare it. So we actually took the metal and rolled it over, and now we're going to have a flare. Okay, that's a crush. Basically, that's a crush type flare. When you tighten your flare nut up, what I do is I tighten it by hand, as much as I can. I get it up there. I just get it snug. I don't get it tight. And then once it's snug like that, if you take like a half a turn, that's probably going to be plenty to hold 1,000 pounds of brake pressure. If you crank that down, it'll probably still seal. But if you ever have to break it loose, you don't have any crimp left in the flare, so you probably aren't going to be able to, or you're going to have a harder time getting it to seal. And also, the flares I have seen push out of the nut. So there's a reason for doing a double flare here. It's not just a cool thing to do. Okay, so now, what I do is I don't crush this all the way. I go down until it feels like it's stopping, which is about right there. Give it a little bit more, and then release my tool. And now we should have next to perfect brake line flare. So if you look at the flare, it turned out real nice. And here's the thing about these. If you're, one reason why it's critical, okay, so hold on. So if you see this shiny part in here, that's the part that got rolled over. So this is actually two thicknesses right here. When you flare, this makes the perfect size flare also, because if you were just to do just a flare and not a double flare, and you stick it too far up in here, it's going to flare this out, but it's going to come out past these edges. You got too much of a flare on there, and then you're not going to be able to get it in the hole. You got to be able to get it past the threads. Doing it this way here works every time. The flare is never too large. It's about as large as it can be. And then how this seals is, if you look at this nut, it's tapered on the inside like this, so that it goes up against the flare. So it goes up against the flare and it pushes on the flare. These don't usually push out, but if you crush it all the way, you stand a pretty good chance of, because you're crushed all the way, and then this is tapered, so it keeps pushing, and then it starts pushing that out, and then you're in trouble. So it's really easier to just reflare. Sometimes you're in a really tight spot. I've looked for flare tools where you can, flare something in this much area, and yeah, they got some stuff that is better than this old stuff. Just for a standard flare, there's no reason to have better than this, but if you're in tight areas, then this is hard to do. You're holding this by hand. and it's more of a young guy thing. I'm an old guy. My wrists are, I got carpal tunnel and arthritis and all that good stuff from being a mechanic for 45 years. Anyway, that's pretty much how to do it. It's easy to do. Don't be afraid to do it. You follow these steps and you'll have good luck. Good luck in your ventures.